we're going to be discussing hip mobility. So this was something that was requested last week in one of our lives. There was a question about it, so we're going to talk about hip mobility. And you likely know whether hip mobility is something that you are in need of. Most of us could use some level of hip mobility work, but we're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about how you can self-assess yourself, some different keys for mobility, and then I'm going to take you through some different hip mobility exercises. So if you have the time and the space to follow along with me when we do the exercises, please do. Otherwise, you can come back to this live later and do it then. So let's see, I want to make sure I got my chat available here. Looks like we are good to go. Oh, before I get started, check out my awesome new tank top. Lift strong, live long. Pretty cool, right? So this is by Old Lady Gaines. If you haven't seen that t-shirt brand, she's got a lot of really awesome t-shirts and tank tops with really fun patterns and designs and phrases on there, so definitely check that out. Okay, so we're going to dive into hip mobility. So without any further ado, why is hip mobility important? Why should you care about hip mobility? So mobility means having control throughout your range of motion, as opposed to flexibility, which just means having the range of motion. So flexibility might mean that I could, pull my foot up behind my head. I can't. But say I can use my arms to pull my foot behind my head. That means I'm real flexible in the hips. But can I actively lift my foot up and put it behind my head? That would be being mobile as opposed to just being flexible. So when we talk about hip mobility, we are talking about your range of motion, but we're also talking about having strength and control of that range of motion. So mobility training is really a form of strength training, just strength training throughout the range of motion. This can be really important because bridging the gap between your flexibility and your mobility can help reduce your risk of injury. Injuries typically come from imbalance, so if you're really flexible but you don't have great strength throughout that range, then you're susceptible to getting injured in that range of motion. So when we bridge that gap between our flexibility and mobility, we are just safeguarding and bulletproofing our body. So if you have stiffness, whether that's in the hips or anywhere in your body really, stiffness can indicate a lack of flexibility, which is usually what people associate, like, my hips are tight, I need to stretch my hips, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. So if you're feeling stiffness, it could mean that you don't have the flexibility, or it could mean that you don't have the strength, because your body will tighten up certain ranges of motion if it perceives that it's not safe to go there. And again, that could be due to lack of flexibility, but it's often also due to the lack of strength, i.e. the lack of mobility there. So stiffness is not always necessarily an indicator that you need to stretch. Sometimes if you're stiff in a certain area and you stretch it more, it can make it worse if what you're lacking there is strength and having to work on that mobility. Okay, so hip mobility in particular can affect your back, your knees, your ankles. So having healthy hips is going to help facilitate having stronger joints that are surrounding the hip as well, and the other way around, right? If you work on your ankle mobility, that's going to help your knees. It's going to help your hips. Farron 10, good question. I'll get to that in a moment. So hip mobility can decrease pain, stiffness, and discomfort. It can often open up space for your lower back to feel better. So oftentimes if you have a stiff or painful lower back, working on hip mobility can sometimes alleviate that because the back can compensate for stiff hips. So if you're dealing with lower back discomfort or challenges, working on your hip mobility may really help you with that, and it'll take off some of the pressure from the lower back. So with our hips, there's different ranges of motion for your hips, right? We've got hip flexion, which would mean like if you're lifting up your hip, this is flexing your hip. Okay, we've got hip extension, which would be like this way. This is your hip extension. We've got abduction, where you're moving the leg away from the body, or adduction, where you're moving the leg into the body, or maybe across the midline that way. And then we've also got rotation of the hip. So the hip is a ball and socket joint, and there's rotation that can happen. So this would be your external rotation of the hip, you're externally rotating, and then internal rotation of the hip. Okay, and that's something that people often, they may be more familiar with training, like strengthening their hip flexors, training into hip flexion or extension, different booty exercises work your hip extension. But particularly, people often don't train their hip rotation. So that's something we're going to take a look at today, because the rotation of your hip, that internal and external rotation, that ball being able to rotate and glide in that capsule or in that socket, is going to affect all your other ranges of motion. Okay, so hip flexion often requires some internal rotation. So if your internal rotation is limited, you may struggle with hip flexion or deep hip flexion, for example, in like a deep squat position. Okay, and essentially, if you improve your rotation, it's going to have good carryover to all your other ranges of motion, which is why it's important to work on that rotation. Okay, so a few other components that go into hip mobility. Pelvic mobility. Okay, I talk about pelvic tilts a lot because pelvic tilts are such an important exercise for your lower back, for your hips, for your core. But being able to tilt the pelvis, so having good control and being able to isolate the pelvis, as well as being able to hike the pelvis from side to side, being able to glide and do circles. Okay, all that pelvic mobility is going to help you with your hip mobility. Glute and hip flexor strength, because as I already mentioned, your hip flexors are going to help you in that hip flexion position, and in extension, you want to have strong glutes. Similarly, if you're abducting, okay, you're using those hip flexors and glutes. And then, of course, that internal-external rotation. There's a lot of different muscles that work in internal and external rotation. Hi, Abby. Thanks for joining. Awesome. You said you tried the shin circles and enjoyed them. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about how you can self-assess your hip mobility, and particularly your internal and external rotation, because as I mentioned, I think that's something that people don't often look at or work on. So I'm going to show you a little simple drill you can use to assess your internal and external rotation from side to side, and a way that you can look at, I'm just going to demonstrate for you after that, how you can determine the difference between your flexibility and mobility, or what's the difference between, another way to say that would be your active and passive range of motion. So your passive range of motion is your flexibility. The range of motion you can get into, if you're using your hands to, say, pull your knee to your chest, or if somebody else was pushing you into a stretch, or you were using the floor, versus your active range of motion would be your ability to use your muscles to pull that knee into your chest. Okay, so that's the difference between that flexibility and mobility. So let's take a look at self-assessing. And another way that you can self-assess with hip mobility is using pain or discomfort to measure. And by that I mean, if you have a certain range of motion that doesn't feel comfortable for you in your hips, say in a deep squat or something, you feel a little bit of pain or discomfort somewhere. That would be another metric you could use if you're working on your hip mobility. You can retest that position. Is it improving that pain or discomfort? Is that pain or discomfort slightly less? Okay, so let's see if I can get the camera angle right. So if you want to try this along with me, you're going to need to lay down on the floor. Okay, so I feel like I may have to end up lowering my tripod, but hopefully not. So you're going to lay back on your elbows. Okay, and you're going to spread the legs a little bit apart, and what you're going to do is you're just going to take one side and you're going to move your internally rotate your hip. So trying to keep your leg mostly straight, try not to totally bend the knees. You're just going to see where can you get to without really straining or forcing on your internal rotation. Okay, and then you try the same thing on the other side. Okay, and you just notice, what range you're able to go to, and in particular, it could be interesting to see like which side has more internal rotation, okay? I'm not sure if you can tell based on what I'm doing, but this side, my right side, has more internal rotation. It's easier for me to rotate, and I'm getting further into the range than this other side. Okay, I'm not able to get very far, and it's more difficult. I'm starting to have to kind of strain at the end to try to move in. Okay, and then we can test our external rotation, which would be dropping the foot to the outside. Okay, and just doing a few reps and noticing visually where you're getting to and the sensation. Is it easy? Is it hard? Okay, and then same thing on the other side. So as you may or may not be able to tell, I have more external rotation here on my left leg. It looks like it's right for you, but my left leg, I have more rotation than I do on my right, even though it feels a little bit better almost on my right. Okay, so that's one way that you can kind of test your rotation, and you can use this position to retest after you do some different exercises, and you can see, is it improving my range of motion or not? Because that is one way that we can get direct feedback when we do mobility work, is do an exercise and then retest a position, say that like range of motion, or a position that, as I mentioned, might be causing pain or discomfort. Did it improve the range, or did it decrease pain or discomfort? That would be a positive indicator that that's probably a good exercise for you. Now, one other thing I want to show you here is if you're looking at just like this is a way that you could look at an example of your passive versus active range of motion. And again, this is only one range, so it's only going to show you for your hip flexion while laying on your back. But for example, this is going to be my passive range of motion. I can really pull my knee into my armpit, essentially. So this is like my passive range of motion because I'm using my arm to pull me into this position. But my active range of motion would be, where can I actively pull myself into? So you notice I can still get pretty far. I'm like really activating and using my hip flexor to pull me in, but I'm not nearly as close as this, right? So that's kind of the gap between my passive and active range of motion. And it's normal to have a gap between your passive and active range of motion. And ideally, with mobility training, you minimize that gap so that you have better control throughout your entire range of motion, which again is just an indicator of strength and control in that range of motion or that position. Okay, so that's a way that you can kind of self-assess, okay? It's just a basic way. Of course, there's different ways where you could get a professional to assess you, and that you could get more specific information. But I think in general, for just the purposes of improving your mobility, you can use something simple like that just to test and see whether an exercise is helpful for you. Yeah, Abby, I have spent a lot of time working on my mobility, although not as much in recent years. But the good news is that I think if you put in work on your mobility, it's fairly easy to maintain it, which is nice. Okay, so I want to talk about a few keys to improving mobility. So this is going to apply to hip mobility, but any type of mobility that you're working on. Be gentle and be patient. Okay, so those things are really important because your nervous system is going to feel safer when you are gentle. If you are forcing a range of motion, you could potentially cause pain, injury. You could cause your body to stiffen up because it feels unsafe being forced into a position. So it's important to be gentle. It's important to be patient because mobility work can take time. So if you haven't done any mobility or flexibility work, sometimes the improvements can happen quite quickly, but sometimes they take a long time as well. It depends on your current flexibility and your body type, your recovery, how your body responds. So be patient and know that mobility work is going to take a little bit of time. Going slow is important when you're working on your mobility because you're essentially, as I mentioned, you're trying to gain control throughout a range of motion. So if you rush through an exercise, you're essentially defeating the purpose of the mobility training because rushing through a range of motion doesn't require much control. Well, it requires a certain level of control, but it doesn't require the strength component that's needed to improve mobility. As I mentioned, no forcing. Forcing doesn't work well in any relationship, including the relationship with your body. And it's important to work in a range that feels good. So rather than being uncomfortable or in pain while doing an exercise, which again sends alarm bells to your nervous system, it's best to work within the range that feels good, that avoids any pain or extreme discomfort. This is going to have carryover. So if you work within a certain range, it actually has carryover like 10 to 15 degrees on either side of that range, like more shallow range and deeper range. And so you don't necessarily have to work in the range that's uncomfortable or painful to see improvements there. It's more important to respect your body's boundaries and stay out of places that cause your body to feel, alarm or pain. Again, is not a safe signal to your nervous system. So staying within the ranges that feel good are really important. And we are going to get to some movements in just a moment, but a few other things I want to mention. There are different types of exercises you can use to improve your mobility. You can do range of motion, like joint mobility. So that would be things like even just something as simple as like a neck side to side. This is like a joint mobility exercise. So there's exercises for every joint of the body that are really simple, that are just taking the joints through the range of motion. And again, if this is something that you've never done, it can be really useful in starting to build the mind-muscle connections, maybe improving your flexibility, but especially improving that mobility, which again is the control throughout the range of motion. And that starts with just awareness of how to move through the range of motion. Then I would say the next type of exercise that's fairly gentle are isometrics. So isometric is just you're in a position, you're not moving, but you're contracting your muscles, right? So just as simple as like if I was here and I push against my arm and I'm contracting this arm to push into it, but it's not moving, right? So gentle isometrics, and gentle especially when you first start or if you're in a fairly new range of motion for you. So using isometrics, short isometrics, longer isometrics, depends on the situation. Then there would be eccentrics, so like a slow, we kind of think of it as like lowering in a squat or a deadlift or something, but essentially activating your muscles, but you're sort of yielding to gravity while engaging the muscles. And then just repetitions throughout a certain range of motion, and then there would be loaded repetitions, which is a more advanced type of mobility training. Just like regular resistance training, body weight's gonna be easier. Once you add a load, it makes it more challenging. Okay, so next we're going to go through some exercises. Once I block a few trolls in the chat here. Okay, so we're going to go through some exercises, which is going to address Farron 10. Hopefully you're still here. What are your go-to hip flexibility and mobility exercises? We're going to go through a few of my go-tos here with some joint mobility, and then we're going to show you some isometrics, okay? So if you guys have other questions if you have questions about what I just talked about, I know I went over it quite quickly, and I think there's some confusion around what mobility training is and how to improve your mobility. So if you have follow-up questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer those in a minute. And we're going to go through some joint mobility. So feel free to join me as we go through these. They're going to be standing, although you may at some point want to have something to hold on to for balance. Like I've got my stall bar here, but you could also use like a staff or a chair, a wall, something that you could hold on to for balance. You may need that in a moment. So we're going to start off with some pelvic exercises because, again, as I mentioned, pelvic mobility is quite important for the hips. And so what we're going to do is you're going to take your feet about hip width apart, little bend in the knees, take your hands to your hips, and you're just going to lift up the back of your pelvis using your lower back muscles. And then you're going to tuck your tailbone under and engage your lower abs. Glutes are relaxed here. Okay, you're just going to do that 10 times. Really simple, really basic exercise. But if your hips are locked and you're not able to move, or if your pelvis is locked, and you're not able to move it smoothly, that is greatly going to limit your hip mobility. It's going to limit your ability to get into certain positions, to feel the stretch in the right areas, to strengthen the right areas. So really focus on isolating the pelvis, using a gentle contraction of the lower abdominals and the lower back. Good. Okay, next one, what we're going to do is we're going to do some pelvic hikes. Okay, so first what we're going to do is you're going to take yourself into an anterior pelvic tilt, which means you're lifting up the back of your pelvis. Okay, you're going to hold that position, and then you're going to lift, like hike that hip up. So I'm lifting up the heel of this foot, and then I'm putting it down, and then I'm hiking the other side. Okay, so you should feel some activation and engagement in your lower back, because we're using those muscles to help us contract and lift that hip up. Okay, then from that position, what I'd like you to do now, you're going to tuck under. Remember, use the lower abs, glutes are relaxed. So keeping that tuck under, we're going to do the same thing. You're going to hike. Okay, so it's going to look a little different now. You're tucking under, and you should feel your lower abs contracting as you hike your pelvis because you're tucking your tailbone under. And I'm just hiking that hip, which is going to lift the heel. Should feel kind of good. So it's essentially core exercise here. Okay, then go ahead and relax. And now, soft knees, you're going to go ahead and just circle the pelvis. So I call these like a hula circle. Okay, you're combining the two exercises that we just did. Essentially, you're kind of hiking each side and tucking under. If this is a tough one for you, it's okay. It takes time, it takes practice. Okay, reverse direction. You want to make sure you can do it in both directions. And again, we're engaging the lower abs to tuck under and little engagement of the lower back. Okay, so if you can get your pelvic mobility fluid, it will really help you with your hip mobility. Okay, go ahead and relax there. Next one, we're going to go into some hip circles. So you can take your feet a little wider than hip width apart. You can place your hands on your hips, and we're going to just trace a nice big circle. Okay, really good stretch on the outside of the glutes. We'll do about 5 reps, and then we'll reverse directions. Okay, go ahead and reverse. Nice, easy breathing. If you can, in and out through your nose. That's going to send a message to your nervous system to relax. One more. Good. For this next exercise, you may want something to hold on to for balance because you're going to be standing on one leg. So I'm going to use my trusty staff here. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do some hip cars or hip range of motion. So what we're going to do with this is you're going to hold on to whatever you're holding on to for balance. You're going to lift your knee up and across your body. We're going to take our hip through its full range of motion. Okay, we're gonna open that knee out as far as it goes. When we kind of hit the end range, you're going to internally rotate by lifting up the heel. Okay, as we start to push the knee back and then together, and then we're going to reverse that by little kick back to extend the hip. So try not to extend your lower back, okay? Just the hip. Then you're going to open the knee up, start to bring the foot down, and returning to center. Okay, we're going to do that 2 more times. Okay, bringing that knee across, up, opening it out. When you hit kind of a block, you're going to internally rotate. Bringing the knees together. Now, a little extension just through the hip. Try not to arch your back. Open that knee up, and then start to lift the knee, drop the foot, and bring it across. And you may feel some clicking and popping here. That's okay as long as it's not painful. If it's painful, reduce your range of motion to avoid any areas where you feel painful clicking and popping. It should not be painful. So if you need to reduce your range of motion, that's okay. Okay, we're gonna go over to the other side. You probably get a little bit of a booty burn just from standing on that one leg, at least I did. Okay, you're gonna go ahead and take that knee across as you lift up. Now you're going to open it out. Try not to move this leg. Try not to go like this. Okay, keep that leg planted where it's at and just focusing on this hip, range of motion for this hip. Knees together. Now extend the hip, lift that knee up to wherever you can. Once you hit that end point, start to lift the knee, drop the foot, bring it back. Okay, we've got 2 more. Knee across the body, open up as wide as you can without rotating on this hip. Then start to internally rotate. Good. Bring the knees together. Now extend back, lift the knee. When you hit your end point, start to lift the knee, drop the foot, bring it back. Okay, so we're doing essentially like a kind of a circle. It's not really in the shape of a real circle, but you're trying to move through that hip, the different ranges of motion of your hip. And the more slow and controlled you do this, the better benefit you're going to have for your hip mobility. Because again, as I mentioned, slow and controlled is the way to go for mobility. Okay, so we've got a few more exercises we're going to do here. Old Chris said, at my age, I sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies. Yep, you know, that does happen. Snap, crackle, pop. Yes, fair and 10. The hip cars are a little bit challenging, especially if you do go slow and really try to work to find your end range of motion. Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of standing internal and external rotation. So you're going to, again, hold on to something for balance. You're going to lift your knee up to about hip level, or you can go lower if that's a little bit too challenging for you. And you're just going to rotate from that hip. So this is our external rotation, and then your internal rotation. Okay, you can see I have a lot more external rotation on this side. Okay, and when you do this, try not to hike your hip up too much. Okay, it's going to happen a little bit naturally, but do your best to just isolate it to your rotation without hiking that hip. Okay, you may feel a little bit of contraction and work in the hip flexor. That's normal. Okay, go ahead and release. Just do about 5 each side here. It's less about how many reps you do and more about the quality of the rep. Again, that you're moving slowly and with control. That you're thinking about gently activating the muscles of the hip and the leg. Okay, and then go ahead and release. Okay, we got a couple more. Okay, this next one is going to be a lower leg circle. Grizz, I'm not familiar with what a Highland dancer is. Doodleman, no, I am not a gymnast. Okay, so this next one, we're going to do some lower leg circles. So again, it's going to require standing on one leg. Use your support. Okay, we're going to, again, bring the knee up to about hip level, and you're going to do some lower leg circles. So you're circling from the knee joint, you'll notice you're going to get also some internal and external rotation on the hip. I'm also circling my ankle, just getting a little extra bang for your buck. Full lower leg and ankle joint circles, good for your knees too. Reverse it for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And you don't necessarily have to go through your full hip range of motion, like you don't need to lift all the way up into your external rotation. Just a nice circle, get things moving. Okay, same thing here. We're thinking of rotating from that knee joint, but of course there's also rotation happening from the hip here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the health of all these joints is interrelated, okay? Healthy hips are gonna help your knees and your ankles and vice versa. Reverse. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead and release. Give your hip flexors a little break before this last one, because this last one is a tough one. Thanks, South to West. Glad you're enjoying them. Hopefully you're trying them along with me. Doodleman, I don't do any sports. I just lift weights and walk and teach mobility. Hi, Betty. You asked if the SI joint can cause inflammation, only one leg and knee pain. You know, I'm sorry, I can't help with specific injuries. I do recommend seeing a doctor or physical therapist. SI joint can definitely cause inflammation. I would take a look. One of my main recommendations if you are dealing with an injury is first taking a look at your baseline, you know, health elements of your health that are going to contribute to healing, which should be, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting good hydration that doesn't have like clean water? Are you getting healthy food, so minimizing your any toxins that are in the food? Are you lowering your stress levels? Those 4 things are going to be really key for healing anything. The body does have amazing capacity for healing, so I wish you best of luck on healing. Thanks, Taz. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Muse. Okay, we got one more little joint mobility exercise we're going to do, and then I'm going to show you some isometrics. So for this one, what you're going to do, again, one leg. We're getting some good strengthening work on the legs here. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to lift up, and then you're going to extend. Okay, you're going to bend and extend. Now, you can modify this one. You don't have to lift your knee all the way up to here. That's more challenging. The higher you lift your knee, the more challenging this exercise is. You could stay low down here. Okay, this is still going to challenge your hip flexor. You can move a little bit higher, just whatever the height is that works for you. It might actually be even a little bit easier to go on to lift the leg that's closer to the staff, now that I think about it. So lift the leg, extend, and then slowly bring it back in. Okay, you're going to do that 10 times, nice and slow. 3, and again, work at the depth that works for you, because this can cause quad cramping. Be warned. Cramping isn't necessarily dangerous or bad, but it's just very uncomfortable. Good, 2 more. And release. Other side. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times if you have stiffness in your hips, in your hip flexors in particular, stretching isn't always the answer, okay? Often strengthening is what's going to make your hips feel less stiff. Stiffness, the nervous system creates a sensation of stiffness if it doesn't feel safe to go into a certain range of motion. And often we don't feel safe in a certain range of motion if we don't have good strength and control there, okay? Go ahead and release. We'll take a little breather before we do our isometrics. So you can see how with some of those joint mobility exercises, they actually start to feel a bit like a workout, right? So they are starting to work your strength, and you will feel a burn similar to strength training because mobility training really is just a form of strength training. Let's see. Taz, you said you just started kettlebell training. You're starting slow and light and doing mobility. That's excellent. That sounds like a very smart way to get started. Doodleman, you said, what's the purpose of the hip flexor? Are you talking about that exercise you just showed, or what does your hip flexor do in your body? Which the name, as the name indicates, it flexes your hip. That's the big role of your hip flexor, but of course it also plays a role in any other range of motion of your hip. Hi, The Real Story. Thanks for joining and subscribing. You asked, do you have any knowledge about fixing uneven hips? So uneven hips can be caused by a number of things. I think everybody has uneven hips. So I think just based on our anatomy as human beings and how our internal organs are placed and the way our body is designed, your hips are probably going to be a little bit uneven. So hips being uneven isn't in and of itself a problem. It could become a problem if either the discrepancy becomes too large or it causes pain syndromes or discomfort. I think the best way that you can start having an idea of what to do if your hips are uneven is start exploring your range of motion and start paying attention. Maybe you take notes, maybe actual notes or maybe mental notes on where are the discrepancies, how do you notice them, and just start to become acquainted with what's going on so that you can better understand how to make adjustments. Because sometimes we think we need to fix the body, and perhaps the body is doing what it's doing for a very good reason, and trying to fix it can often lead to a bigger problem. And I can't prescribe anything specific for anybody because I don't know enough information, and that would be irresponsible of me as a coach to tell you something specific to do for your problem because I don't know you or your body. Farron 10, you said, it's a nice set of exercises. Can they be done daily or every other day? You could do them daily. I think you probably don't need to do them daily. I'm not really a believer in you need to do something every day because in terms of like a specific exercise, I think your body actually adapts to less input than you think. Just a little bit of input is enough. So you could do it every other day, but I would say even if you did it like once or twice a week or once every other week is good. It's more important that you're like consistent over time. If you want to see improvement in these exercises, you've got to be consistent with them over time, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to do them many times per week. It just means you need to do them over the course of months. You need to regularly incorporate them into your routine. Old Grizz, you said, do you do these before, after, or before and after? These exercises, I would say they could be part of a warm-up. They could be part of a cool-down. They could also be a mobility workout in and of itself. Yeah, I think Doodleman, you said maybe that's what you should do before barbell squats. You feel stiff in your hip flexor. I think these kind of exercises would be great to do to prep your body before doing something like a barbell squat, to prep your hip flexors in particular. Hi, Jez. Thanks for joining. We're happy you're here. The Real Story, you said you have pain and discomfort. Yeah. Sorry to hear that. Pain and discomfort is never fun, but I think the best thing that we can do is try to be a bit of like a detective within our own body, because other people can only prescribe so much to us. And that's a challenge when it comes to pain and discomfort, because it would be nice if somebody, some professional out there could just give us the prescription. It would fix what we're dealing with. But unfortunately, our bodies are also unique, and that professional is limited by what you tell them. You are the person who has the most information about what you're feeling in your body and what's going on with you day to day. So I really encourage you to be a detective for yourself, especially around things that cause pain to flare or get triggered, things that cause the pain to diminish. And that could be specific things with regards to exercise. It could be foods, it could be sleep, it could be stress, it could be emotions. Doodleman, no, I am not a physical therapist. I'm a personal trainer and a coach. Taz asked if you could use one kettlebell weight for the rest of your life. What weight would you choose? That's a good question. If I could use only one kettlebell weight for the rest of my life, I would probably choose an 8 kg or an 18-pound kettlebell, because there's tons of stuff I can do with it, and I'd be able to use it when I was like 80 years old versus, maybe when I'm 80, using a 12 kg for certain things will be a little bit heavy. I don't know. I don't know what I'll be when I'm 80, but I would say probably an 8 kg kettlebell. Hi, Urbis. Thanks for joining. Abby, you said, how much protein do you take per body weight? I aim for about a gram per pound body weight. I don't necessarily always get there, but in that range, especially like over the week, my average will probably be around that. Thanks, Doodleman. I appreciate the subscribe. Okay, so we've got a couple more exercises I want to show you. Actually, three or so. So we're going to work some isometrics for hip internal and external rotation. Now for this, you are going to need something like a staff. You could also use a broomstick. So if you have a broomstick around and you don't have a wooden staff like this, a broomstick will work great. Or anything that's kind of like a stick, okay? And you're going to need a chair or something to sit on. I'm going to grab mine. Okay, so this is just a really simple way to train isometrics with your internal and external rotation. It is far from the only way that you can train it, but it's a simple way that I feel most people can access the position, given that they have the tools. All right, so what we're going to do is you can set up with, we're going to work one leg at a time. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the staff kind of under your leg and to the outside of your heel. Okay, so what this is going to do here is we're going to be working our external rotation, okay? Because the staff is providing us with, we're going to work our internal rotation, okay? The staff is providing us, I had to look down and be like, wait, no, my staff's on the outside of my foot. Okay, so the staff is providing us with a resistance to push against. Okay, so if I'm pushing my heel outward, that's pushing into internal rotation, right? Versus if I'm pushing inward, that's external rotation of my hip. So we're going to work on an isometric for internal rotation. Now, you can do this at different ranges, right? So you can use the staff to kind of push yourself into different ranges of motion, but we're just going to do it kind of the easiest, which is just keep your leg right where it's at. Don't push into any extreme ranges. And all you're going to do is you're going to provide resistance with this hand and the staff, and you're going to push your heel outwards into the staff. And when I say push it out, I mean think 10 to 20% effort. So you're not doing a max effort and you're not trying to contract like crazy. You're trying to contract actually as gently as you can, okay, where you feel the contraction. So go ahead, if you're following along with this, if you're able to do this with me, go ahead and push that heel into the staff. And then you're pushing your hand into the staff to give yourself a little bit of resistance, okay? And just holding this for like 10 to 15 seconds, and then you relax. Okay, so you depending on whether you've done this kind of work before, you may immediately feel your hip flexor fire up. you may not feel it at all. There may be some time where you need to build kind of mind-muscle connection to how to contract into internal rotation. Okay, we're going to try it again. So go ahead and just get ready and push that heel outward into the staff. Again, 10 to 20% effort. If you contract really hard, sometimes these larger muscle groups that are already strong will take over. And if you contract gently, you'll actually allow other muscles to work that maybe aren't able to, get their work in if you're contracting hard. Go ahead and relax. So I'm not feeling a ton of burn like when I'm doing the contraction, but afterwards I can feel that I worked my hip. And again, especially if you've never done this before, you may be sore from doing this gently, even if you don't think you are in the moment, because your muscles maybe haven't contracted this way before. Okay, go ahead and lift up. We'll do this one more time. Okay, pushing outwards for about 10 seconds, gently. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and relax. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on the other leg. Okay, so finding that position, finding some tension from the staff into your heel, and then push outwards. Like on this one, I actually feel it right away, much more intensely, but I think this hip for me is a little bit weaker in internal rotation. And relax. So isometrics are a great way to build your mobility because they are gentler than doing like full repetitions that contain a concentric and eccentric range of motion. The isometric is gentler on the body, it's easier to recover from, and it's when you're working in a range of motion that you're not used to working, again, you're less likely to be super sore if you do an isometric than a full repetition where you're contracting the whole time. Okay, go ahead and push out gently, 10 to 20% effort. Holding for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently release. We've got one more that we're going to do. And then if you want, you can retest your hips. Okay, and push. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently release. Okay, maybe before we move on to our external rotation, go ahead and retest. If you didn't test this at the beginning, then, well, oh well. But your retest will be here, so you're going to just notice how your range of motion feels, if you feel any difference. I don't feel a huge difference, but I do feel like my internal rotation on the side that's limited feels a little bit better, feels a little bit stronger than it did when we first started. And the difference isn't going to be that great within a single training session. We're more using that reassessment to see if the exercise made you feel better or worse. Because if the exercise makes you feel worse after you do it, it maybe isn't the right exercise for you at this time. Ideally, it makes you feel better or slightly improves your range of motion, and that's how you know, okay, this is a helpful exercise for me. Can the hip flexor get big like other muscles? Yeah, your hip flexor can definitely, especially like on the side, it can definitely get bigger for sure. You'll see the definition. Taz said, have you heard of stick mobility? Yes, I have, but I don't do it. I do my own version of stick mobility here. Okay, so we're going to do external rotation now. So you're going to take your staff from the outside in. So that means now you're going to be pushing into external rotation. So you're going to be pushing your heel to the inside towards your midline. Okay, so go ahead and contract. And again, gentle, 10 to 20% effort. And we're holding just about 10 seconds. Nice and easy. We're going to try to isolate that work to our hip, to our leg. Sometimes, again, go ahead and release. when we try to contract too hard, we start asking the full body to kick in, and we'll start feeling tension in our back. We'll start feeling tension, in our shoulder or in our core because we're trying to really bear down. That's the goal with doing a 10 to 20% effort contraction is you want to just isolate it as best you can to your hip, and maybe you'll feel it a little bit in your leg or your glute as well. Okay, so go ahead and get ready and push inward, gentle, and see if you can notice or feel contraction in your hip or glute, or notice where you feel it. Maybe you feel it on the outside of your thigh. Holding 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently release. Again, as I mentioned before, you could go into different ranges of motion here. You could go deeper into your range, but when first starting, best to just start at the simplest position. You can always work up to that range. Of course, ideally, you want to be doing isometrics kind of throughout the range, or exercises throughout the range of motion, because that's what's going to help you, again, regain that control or strength throughout the range. Okay, one more time. Lift up, push in. 10 to 20% effort, nice and gentle. Seeing if you can feel that contraction in your hip for 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and release. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely felt that last one the most. So sometimes it takes a few reps before you really hone in on how to make that connection, especially in that gentle contraction. Doodleman, you said you play soccer and you always feel pumped in your legs, even the hip flexor. Is that enough to strengthen your hip flexor? Likely, if you're playing soccer, you probably have pretty strong hip flexors. And it depends what your goals are. If you're not feeling, if you're not having any problems with your hip mobility, if you have the hip mobility that you're happy with, you may not necessarily need to do a ton of work on it. But there's definitely things that you could do to kind of strengthen your hip flexors further for soccer. So they're definitely getting strong from soccer for sure. Hi Ingus, thanks for joining. Taz, you said, what's a stick mobility drill that's helped you improve your kettlebell lifts? I don't know if there's a specific one that's helped me improve my kettlebell lifts, but I will share a few other ones with you after we do this other side, so stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to do external rotation on this other side. So staff is to the inside of the foot. Go ahead and gently press into the staff. Again, 10 to 20% effort, seeing if you can isolate it to your hip and your thigh for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently release. Okay, we're going to do 2 more just like that. Here we go. Pushing into that staff, pushing the hand into the staff if you need a little more resistance. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently release. Highly encourage you to really tune into your hip and your leg and into the contraction when you're doing this, okay? Just notice what you're feeling. Feel into it. If you're feeling that sensation in your hip or your thigh, can you gently intensify the sensation just by placing your attention there? Okay, let's try that on this last one. Gentle press, tune into that sensation. And slowly release. Okay, so those are a couple of basic drills you can do to start to, like basic isometrics you can do to work on your hip rotation. Then there's another way that you can train your range of motion using the staff with this position is providing yourself resistance throughout the range of motion or into a specific range of motion. So say you really want to work on your internal range of motion, your internal rotation for your hip. Okay, so giving yourself resistance as you move into that internal rotation, and then maybe you just relax on the way back and you push into that range of motion. So now we're working on a gentle contraction throughout the whole range, okay, throughout your range, okay? And again, it may not necessarily be a lot of range. Generally, many people tend to not have a lot of internal rotation, but some people have a lot. I'm jealous of those people. Okay, we'll just do 2 more. And again, you're not trying to contract hard. You're just trying to give yourself a little bit of resistance. So you're just slowing the speed at which you can lift your foot up. Okay, we'll do the same thing on the other side. And again, you could do this with your external rotation as well. We're just going to do it. I'm just showing you with internal. I have a lot less internal rotation on this side, so my range of motion is going to be less here and harder. Gentle contraction. Okay, 1 more. And go ahead and relax. Okay, so I had a question on what stick mobility exercises have helped my kettlebell lifting. That is a good question. I don't know if I specifically have one that has so greatly improved my kettlebell lifting, but a few exercises that I like. I think one that can be really helpful for, say, a kettlebell windmill is working with the staff, where you can use the staff to lower yourself down with control and get comfortable with this position for a kettlebell windmill. So that's one I like. I really like this staff for shoulder mobility. So you can work here. Shoulder similar to the hip is like a ball and socket joint. So rotation's important. So pushing into the staff, working internal rotation, grabbing the staff and trying to open up, contract and pull on the staff, external rotation for the shoulders. I also like using this as a doing a thoracic spine stretch. You can also work your pelvic tilts with the staff. So that's a good one. It's a good one to do hip, like a split squat type exercise where you can use the staff to support and just go into the range that you want to go into, working on some of that hip flexion. So there's unlimited number of possibilities what you can do with the staff. Chaco, that ladder behind me, it's called a stall bar or a Swedish ladder. I can send you the website for where I got it. They're called Beyond Balance. I do have a discount code if you are interested in getting one. It's just KB Fit Britt. You can get 10% off at Beyond Balance. Oh, yeah, that's funny, Taz. You said can I show shoulder drills, and I just showed some, but I can show some additional ones if you like. Ingus, you said, do you do hip flexor band exercises? Yeah, hip flexor band exercises are good. I don't really do any specific ones for mobility, more like for glute activation and stuff like that, but you could absolutely use that for mobility. Bands are great for mobility work. Doodleman, you said I'm laying down. Whenever I lift my knee, I feel my hip flexor tighten. Is that normal? What does it say about your hip flexor? That says that your hip flexor flexes your hip. And if you're lifting your knee, you're flexing your hip. So that means your hip flexor is working. That's good news. Thanks, Elena. I'm glad you like them. So I'll show you a few more. Taz, you had a question about shoulder drills with the staff. So yes, absolutely, you can do lots of shoulder drills with the staff. Just a nice shoulder flexibility drill. You've probably seen this before. Some people call it shoulder dislocates, but I don't really like to call it that because I don't want people to think they're going to dislocate their shoulder doing this. But this is a nice one just to stretch out the shoulder. Similarly, doing like a handcuff stretch with this, or a shoulder extension stretch is a good one. The wider your hands are, the easier, the tighter your hands on are, the harder the stretch. You can also work your shoulder rotation with the staff this way. So this is stretching into external rotation of the shoulder. Be cautious, don't try to overstretch this. You could also do it in this position, depends on what's comfortable for you. But you could do isometrics here for your external and internal shoulder rotation. Okay, so you could also do it this way, where you're pushing. This would be more contracting into your external rotation. And then, as I mentioned, this is one I really like. So pushing into the staff, internal rotation, pulling outward on the staff, external rotation. Those are kind of the basic ones I can think of right now, but I'm sure there's more. Do you guys have other questions about mobility or about hip mobility specifically? What I'm also going to share here is a blog post I wrote on mobility some years ago that may be helpful if you want a further explanation. Let me try find it here. If you want a further explanation on what I was talking about in the beginning on what flexibility is versus mobility, how to improve your mobility, this is a little more explanation on that. Fine, let me find this. Here's the link to that blog post if you're interested. Doodleman, you said, how will I know if my hip flexors are strong? Well, I think if you're doing physical training, you're playing soccer, your hip flexors are likely strong. In terms of how to know if they're strong, I mean, you could do some different exercises for your hip flexors and see how that goes, but I don't know how you would exactly test whether they're strong. They're, again, if you're active and you're playing soccer, they probably are. Thanks, Ingus. Thanks, old Grizz. Appreciate you joining. Thanks for being here. Abby said, any dynamic stretches before leg day, pre-workout stretches? I would usually tend to do exercises or dynamic stretches that are relative to the exercise you're going to be doing. So if you're going to be doing like back squats or something, doing body weight squats, maybe you do some marching hip flexor exercises, maybe you do some glute activation. Leg swings are a good one for dynamic stretches for a warm-up, like a long lunge type stretch. Taz, you said, have you seen a common mistake people make when working on hip mobility? I think people just don't tend to work on their rotation, so their internal and external rotation. I think people often think of flexibility and mobility as the same thing, or they tend to prioritize like static stretching over mobility, when I think you probably get more bang for your buck and feel and see a bigger difference if you work on strengthening and not just stretching. This staff, I'd have to look it up for you, Jez, but I can tag you in the post inside the Kettlebell Solo membership. This is one of the staffs from that company that we mentioned to you that we have a discount for Kettlebell Solo members, and we do recommend a length there that is best based on your height. This is probably a little bit longer than most people need. Let me, I'll find that for you, Jez. In the meantime, if anybody has other questions on hip mobility, speak now. Jez, I do think that they ship to the UK, but it may be quite expensive. So yeah, there may be, I don't know. I'm not sure what the cost of that would be. There may be other places you could get that's less expensive. I'm going to tag you inside the membership, so you'll get a notification, or you'll see it next time you log in. I thought I should be able to tag you. Yes, Doodleman, it is a martial arts staff, so it is like some kind of kung fu stick for sure. Chaco, you said, do you do club bell workouts or Indian mace? I don't do a lot of club bell because we don't currently have any, but I do love Indian clubs, actually. We got some right here, okay? Love these. These are awesome for, wrist mobility, shoulder mobility, working your grip strength, working your coordination. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with these. So I do enjoy Indian clubs. So these are like super light. There's a lot of cool things you can do with these. I'm messing it up now, but yeah, so I do enjoy Indian. I would say I have spent probably more time in recent years doing these Indian clubs than I have doing club bells. Ingus, I don't squat for weight. Probably the heaviest that I've squatted recently is like 53 pounds, like a 24 kg. I don't do anything super heavy. Hi, Katie. You have a question. How do you strengthen your hands and core for eventually doing a handstand? That's a great question. So strengthening your core and upper body, I would say you should be able to do a strong plank hold. You should be able to hold a minute plank, no problem. You should be able to do at least, ideally you should be able to do like 10 solid chest to floor push-ups. I think you would be much better off starting handstand having that upper body strength. As far as your wrists, I think it's going to be slowly working towards putting your body weight onto them. So you can practice things like, planks and push-ups will help you with building up that strength, but you could also practice things like a crow pose. So if you practice like things like this to strengthen up your hands and get ready to support your full body weight, it's easier on the balance, but it's a similar stress on your wrists. It is important to work on your wrist mobility. So having like a wrist mobility routine before you handstand, maybe, you're shifting forward and back, you're shifting side to side, you got these kind of things, and just gently prepping your wrist to handle the load for handstands. So it also just means being progressive with your planks, push-ups, and any hand balancing exercises that you do. Taz, ever dealt with shoulder pain? If so, what helped you recover from it? Yes, I have dealt with shoulder pain. Had a shoulder injury a few years ago from progressing too quickly towards trying to do a one-arm handstand. So shoulder and wrist pain, no fun. What helped me recover from it? One, not doing the things that caused it in the first place. So removing those things for a while. Rest. Pain-free range of motion, and slowly working back up to things. I think proper progression is key for avoiding pain and injury, and eating plenty of protein, getting good rest, hydration, giving the body the things that it needs in order to heal. Katie just asked how many to repeat for beginners, and thank you. How many, do you mean how many sets? I would say start at a little, like just a small amount. Maybe it's one set and see how you feel. Add a second set after a couple times of doing that. See how you feel. Once that gets easier, add a third set. So just progress. My recommendation would be to progress slower than you think you need to give your body plenty of time to adapt, because that's how you're going to end up being consistent in the long run and not sustain an injury by trying to progress too quickly. Yes, Doodleman, I do know Ido Portal. Yeah, he's definitely an amazing mover. I have not really followed any of their training programs. From what I know about it, I think some of what they do is unrealistic for most people, but that's just my opinion. Okay. Jez, if you're still here, I just tagged you on the Kettlebell Solo site, so you should be able to see the information about the staffs. Okay, Taz, you said you've been having left shoulder pain for a while and been letting it rest. You're looking for safe exercises to do with or without the staff. How long have you been having shoulder pain? If it's been less than a month, that you've had shoulder pain, I would maybe just give it a month. You could do like gentle range of motion stuff. Like for example, if it doesn't hurt for you to like lift your arm to here, or if it doesn't hurt for you to do real gentle internal external rotations or lifting arm this way, I would say do pain-free range of motion if it hasn't been a month yet. And once you get past a month and without pain, like you've gotten to a month and it's starting to feel better, or ideally you don't have pain when you're starting to do strength training again. Ideally the pain has subsided. But again, if there's ways where you can do pain-free range of motion, that can help with getting the blood and the lymph moving to speed the recovery process, because you don't want your shoulder to just not do anything, right? Because over time that could potentially lead to your shoulder getting, having trouble with those ranges of motion. But ideally the ranges of motion you do are pain-free while your shoulder is recovering. And it takes some time depending on what the injury was or what caused it. And make sure that you're not continuing the things that caused it, because sometimes we tend to be stubborn and, well, I want to keep doing this thing that I was doing even if it's causing us pain. So being honest with yourself about what caused the pain, maybe eliminating that thing for a while. It doesn't mean you can never do it again. It just means you need to give it a break to let your body heal. Any other questions on hip mobility, mobility in general? I am going to be going live. Tomorrow's the third live of the week. We're going live at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I'm going to be talking about kettlebell training for runners. Okay, we had a lot of runners on last Thursday, and they were all interested in a topic on kettlebell training specific for runners. So if you're a runner, whether you're just recreationally a runner or you're a serious runner, be sure to show up tomorrow, because I'm going to give you some tips and thoughts on kettlebell training for runners. Hey, Doodle Man, to each their own. If that's working for you, cool. Ingus, you said depends on your base strength. You squat 100 kg for 10 repetitions with no prior squatting experience. Wow, you're strong. That's awesome. Yeah, I found I used to lift heavier. But what I found in recent years, I'm over 30, so I'm 33. So I've found in recent years, and because of really doing a lot of overtraining to my body and always pushing the weight, pushing the intensity, I found that personally for me, I feel better not lifting heavy very often. I love to lift heavy, but if I start to do it a lot, I don't feel good. My body starts aching. So I know that I feel better lifting light to moderate weight 90% of the time, and every once in a while pushing the weight a little bit more and challenging myself is awesome, but I really don't need to do it all the time, and that's been much more effective for me personally, just in terms of my holistic health. And I think it's awesome that you can squat 100 kg for 10 reps. That's awesome. Great, Elena. Hope to see you at that live tomorrow. Taz, you said, heard of Wildman Athletic. I was watching some of his weighted club and Indian club stuff and kettlebell stuff. Yes, I have heard. Honestly, the main reason I've heard of Wildman a lot because I think people that tend to watch my videos tend to also watch his videos and vice versa. So I haven't watched a ton of his stuff, so I don't know him personally. I don't know his videos super well, but I have heard a bit about him. Doodleman, currently I'm streaming Mondays at 1 p.m. Pacific time, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. And I take topic requests, so every Thursday or Friday I choose my topics for the next week, and I ask for requests from you guys. So make sure you let me know if there's anything specific you'd like to see me talk about with regards to kettlebells, with regards to strength training, fitness, health. Be sure to let me know your requests because I do take those into account when it comes to choosing my topics for the following week. Any last questions here before we say goodbye for today? Yeah, if you hail Satan, you will absolutely be blocked from here. In Jesus' name. That was quite an interesting troll. You're welcome, Taz. Thank you for joining the live. Hope to see you again at a future one. And thanks for your questions. I appreciate the questions you had. Good questions. Ingus, you said, do your CNS has your CNS gotten stronger? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by CNS getting stronger. I believe that my CNS is a lot healthier now than it used to be because honestly, sometimes I still think my CNS is a little fried from all the overtraining I've done, but it is way better than it used to be. So nervous system wise, I'm a lot healthier now with lifting less frequently and less intensely. But that's my personal experience. Awesome, Jez. Thanks, Abby. Appreciate you ladies joining me again. Thank you guys all for joining me for your questions. Hope to see you tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time for kettlebell training for runners. And if you have any other suggestions or questions, feel free to comment on any of my videos. I do my best to respond to them as quickly as possible. So appreciate you guys being here. Thanks, Chaco. See you guys next time. Have a great